It's hard to imagine a Rugby World Cup where New Zealand are not favourites. Ever since winning the inaugural tournament on their nonplussed home patch in 1987, the All Blacks have entered 6 of the subsequent 7 as comfortably the best team in the world. And they've also held that title for pretty much all of the other 46 months in between each tournament. Losing to the All Blacks is just tradition for the rest of the rugby world. And yet, this last year, something weird has happened. Whilst they're still the bookies number 1, this All Blacks team are unusually shakily placed to retain the World Cup. Whereas they won 14 from 15 in the year leading into the 2015 tournament, the 2018-19 All Blacks have slipped to 3 losses and a draw, and then, just 2 months shy of holding their top spot for 10 straight years, New Zealand lost the number 1 world rankings title to Wales. I'm going to say that again, not because it's relevant, but because I really enjoyed saying it. Wales became the best rugby team in the world. So, coming into this tournament on their weakest run in a decade, just how are the All Blacks shaping up, and what chances should we be giving them of a three-peat success in 3 weeks' time? The All Blacks have never lost a pool game across all 8 Rugby World Cups to date. They've the tournament's best win rate, winning 44 of their 50 games. They've scored more points than anyone else, more tries, more conversions, which really should be a given considering the previous statistic. They top virtually every record, every stat, and yet there's always been a weird kind of paradox surrounding New Zealand and Rugby World Cups. Despite having won the deceased Clergyman Cup more than anybody else, the All Blacks have still massively underperformed by only ever having lifted it 3 times. It was David Kirk's Cup in 1987, but after that, the curse set in. In 91, they were downed in the semis by cocksure wing-based Aussie shock jock David Campese. In 95, they got all the way to the final thanks to Jonah Lomu ordering a new carpet in the semis, but then lost that final to Morgan Freeman, Matt Damon and food poisoning. In 99, that French team turned up and everybody just sighed because there was nothing anyone else could do about it. In 03, it was another semi-final against Australia as the man with the least impressive name in the world, Elton Flatley, kicked them out of the tournament. Then, in 2007, that French team came back, led by Thierry Dusautoir, putting in possibly the single greatest performance by any individual in the history of the Rugby World Cup. I think only really ever matched, only challenged by Dusautoir himself in 2011, where he was so good in the final against the All Blacks that he not only won Man of the Match, but World Player of the Year, pretty much on the basis of that one match. And nobody can even argue because he'd done more in that one game than every other rugby player in every other rugby match all year had done put together. However, despite Dusautoir's best efforts, that game was the one where the curse finally lifted. Finally back on their own home soil, New Zealand won their 2nd World Cup, thanks to this amateur fisherman not quite missing an easy penalty in a performance so inspirational it taught everyone in rugby the word whitebaiting and inspired The Kick, a Kiwi TV movie so gloriously bad you're almost expecting Tommy Wiseau to turn up playing Mar Nonu. The All Blacks then repeated the trick in 2015 with genuinely one of the best squads of all time. Their pack with rampant Carter Nonu-Smith with Sonny Bill on the bench was pretty much the best midfield in the history of rugby. Beauden Barrett was their 3rd choice fly half for crying out loud, and he was only on the bench to score the winner because Aaron Cruden forgot to drink a few glasses of water before going to bed the day before the squad flew out to play Argentina. And whilst it's easy enough to compare 2019 South Africa to 2015's Australia, 2019's Ireland to 2015 South Africa, or Ivy Year's Scotland to a fruitcake, it's only really possible to place one New Zealand team next to another. The team at the peak for 4 years, trying to maintain that and still themselves peak once every 4 years. So, in order to assess how the All Blacks are shaping up for the 2019 tournament, the best thing to do is to look back at how they prepared for the last 2 tournaments. In the lead up to 2011, New Zealand lost 3 games. However, 2 of those games were in the Rugby Championship immediately before the World Cup, as they sent roughly the team that played Tonga, Canada and Japan in the World Cup itself out to face South Africa and Australia. This meant that their weakened team was battle-hardened against who were then the 2nd and 3rd ranked teams in the world. And they had time to click together as combinations, so they'd have no issue putting their tier 2 opposition to the sword. These 2 losses were boosts for their opponents, but not setbacks for the All Blacks at all. They were preparation games worth throwing to maintain momentum once the tournament began. There was only one that did set them back somewhat, which was the late loss against Australia in Hong Kong, which even then wound up being worth it because it gave us the opening scene of The Kick, considered by critics to be the finest film since the 2006 masterpiece Crank, starring Jason Statham. This approach was akin to doing 3 straight days of absolute face smash cramming ahead of an exam, getting every single fact into your head but missing a few meals and maybe parental birthdays along the way. Having learnt from those losses, the All Blacks then decided to start revising little and often in the next cycle. Instead of bashing together a second string team and expecting them to cope with the Springboks, New Zealand started slowly dropping 1 or 2 young players into the first 15. They used every single substitution they were allowed to between 2011 and 15, letting them blood the players they deemed good enough as much as possible. This meant their squad for the 2015 World Cup had an average of 45 caps a player, and by the knockout stages, their nominal third choice halfbacks had 35 and 21 caps respectively. Hansen's steady rotation meant the All Blacks entered the World Cup with players who were good enough to start a final, not even making the squad, and hence the result was scarcely ever in doubt. So the All Blacks tried to do this again this time, except it hasn't quite gone as smoothly. This is, in no small part, thanks to the sheer amount of money available in the Northern Hemisphere for a talented rugbyman. The All Blacks had 5 first fives who've eked at world-class status over the last 4 years, and yet 2 of them are unavailable after signing for European clubs instead of chasing the Japanese dream. This has meant 1 injury to human fragile Damien McKenzie, and New Zealand are suddenly in a risky situation at fly half. 1 more injury, and they're turning to either uncapped Josh Ioane or getting really desperate and greenlighting a sequel to The Kick. This issue is made all the more prescient thanks to the nebulous nature of the current first 5 situation. Last year, South Africa kicked off the All Blacks' new losing habit and highlighted a huge weakness in their game. In the final play, 2 points behind, the All Blacks showed no signs or understanding of how to set for a drop goal. This led them into an autumn series in which they made a number of small changes that changed their game plan completely. Whereas previously almost all responsibility was shouldered by Aaron "delete this" Smith, they began putting it all on Beauden Barrett, including kicking for position far more and forcing him to take drop goals whenever it was on, just so he could get used to doing it under pressure. I'd imagine Hansen was hoping this would be just a cosmetic difference, that the game would still function as well as it had, but it had a lot of knock-on effects. However, even after a narrow escape against England, they stuck to their BB gun for the game against Ireland, where things did not work at all. Not only did they lose, but they failed to score a try for the first and only time of this World Cup cycle against a single nation. In the last month, New Zealand switched it up again and dropped Barrett back to 15 and brought in Richie Mo'unga at 10. The return game to retain the Bledisloe showed signs that this may be the answer, but the fact they're still looking for that answer is the problem. At this point in 2011, the All Blacks knew their first team, they knew their second team, and they knew how to play each and every game in the pool stage. At this point in 2015, Hansen had built a squad so adept and so able, they could have played anyone in any position and they'd be comfortable of an easy win. But at this point in 2019, which is a very contrived way of saying at the present, the All Blacks do not know their best team. They're 1 or 2 injuries away from starting players who are totally unproven at test level. The 2015 model worked so well, the All Blacks assumed they could just copy it again without expecting the world to react or circumstance to interfere. New Zealand will no doubt revert back to elements of what they were doing 2 years ago. They've tried to use last autumn to build slowly towards having a more complete game. But even if they can put it all together, we've seen that plan C and D after plan A, B don't necessarily work as cleanly. And this serves to leave the All Blacks in a very fascinating position. They're the first amongst equals, the best, but they're still very beatable. Wales and South Africa built to a peak this September, whereas New Zealand are hoping to just hold on to their old powers for long enough to win a World Cup in a very different kind of way to how they just bombarded 2015. The All Blacks are still favourites, but they're not nailed on. And that makes things, I would say, very exciting indeed. Thank you for watching that. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you thought that was good. And thank you to everyone that's been so patient during the last week, 2 weeks since I last uploaded the video. Some of you may be well aware of exactly what happened, but a couple of weeks ago I had a number of copyright strikes put up by Six Nations Rugby against the channel, which basically meant that I was suspended from uploading for a week, so I couldn't put anything up for the week, which is why I didn't do a game on the second Bledisloe match, because I physically couldn't have uploaded it. And also, if those strikes hadn't been sorted inside a week, the channel would have been deleted and everything you saw gone. So a lot of the videos disappeared for a few hours, people wondering what happened. But thankfully, I put out a couple of tweets about this, and it's genuinely one of the loveliest things that I've ever experienced. Was literally thousands of you felt strongly enough about the stuff that I do to go and write to the Six Nations and tweet to them. And within a few hours, entirely to their credit, they'd come back and they wanted to talk to me and negotiate and really actually recognised the role that the fans play in the Six Nations, and how led by the rugby community it is as a tournament. And they were great and entirely cooperative after that initial, scare they put in place. So I want to say thank you both to them for being so willing to sort the situation, and also to all of you, everyone that really got behind me there, because it meant more than I can possibly express. It made every evening that I've spent sat here just watching the same footage of Tonga for the 800th time, trying to work out which 6 seconds to pull to fit in somewhere else. Every sort of 14-hour day I've pulled after pulling more for the previous 3 days. It made all of them feel worthwhile. It made me feel like I'd done something that really affected and mattered to people. So thank you very much. It meant a hell of a lot. Something else that means a hell of a lot is handball. I forget handball exists during the other 46 months of the year in which the Olympics aren't on. But during the Olympics, I always love handball. And so, if you want to remember about handball when the Olympics isn't on, then why not head to the Find a Player app, which is a great way to meet people that, like the channel, people that might have written to the Six Nations and got that overturned, whatever's the case, or just meet strangers and play sports you're interested in. So be that touch rugby, be that handball, be that football, bit of five-a-side, whatever it is you're up to, you can head there and find that then. In the meantime, I'll see you next week for the next one on this series on all of the players, the teams which are in the World Cup, which is really, really soon. Bye.